Night Dive Studios' System Shock 2 Remaster is something that's eluded us for years now. Originally announced way back in 2019 and delayed for various reasons, it's only just now in 2025 where we're finally getting it, at least if you're on PC. Yeah, yet another in a long lineup of older titles made more accessible on modern platforms. Plus it also happens to be for one of the all-time best immersive sims ever made. A game which, along with the first System Shock, is really responsible for influencing countless titles that followed. The thing is though, this isn't one of those instances where playing that original game was super hard or tricky to do. Compared to something like The Thing, which was their last big project, which was more or less unavailable to purchase legally beforehand. Or like what they did with Turok 3, which was completely unplayable unless you owned a Nintendo 64 or used an emulator, where I'd still argue in both cases it was still more or less unplayable. System Shock 2, on the other hand, I mean, you could have hopped onto Steam or good old games at any time and picked this thing up for peanuts. So it is a bit different in that this remaster isn't really bringing back an old obscure, hard-to-play game and putting it into the mainstream. The other thing to keep in mind about this remaster is that it's not really aimed at people who are super familiar with the base game either. I mean, if you're the kind of person who knows the Von Braun better than you do your own family members, well, then I'd almost argue that there's not even that much here worth revisiting anyway. Also considering that most of the improvements and the updates come from community content that's been around for years to begin with, in particular the Shock Texture Upgrade project. Not to mention the Shock Community Patch, which also addresses a whole bunch of bugs and issues from that original release. But if you're like me, and you maybe haven't played System Shock 2 in a few years, or you haven't played it to begin with, well, then this is going to be perfect. More so too if you're playing on the consoles, the Xbox, the PS5 and the Switch. In fact, I'd wager that that's the intended demographic they're going for here. So yeah, if you're just after an easy, accessible way to experience one of gaming's all-time best immersive sims, and don't really care how long it's taken us to get to this point, well, then yeah, you're not going to be disappointed. Now as for the actual remaster, there is quite a lot of stuff to talk about there. However, I do think I should go over what System Shock 2 is all about first, assuming that a lot of the people watching this haven't even played it. But if you only want to know about what the remaster brings to the table, well then skip ahead to the time code on the screen and we can get right to it. But if you know nothing about what you're getting yourself into, well then let's cover that stuff first. Yeah, buckle up, bitch.
Yeah, boy.
Right, so originally released way back in 1999, System Shock 2 came out the same year as Quake 3 Arena, Unreal Tournament, and Half-Life Opposing Force. And the fact that it still stood tall amongst these titans, not to mention above them in some ways, really shows you how much of a big deal it was. Again developed by Looking Glass Studios, the story takes place decades after the events in that first game. This time you're playing as a nameless soldier on the Von Braun, a faster-than-light starship, and you're waking out of cryosleep with amnesia to find that the entire crew is either dead or infected by an alien parasite called the Many.
You're on board the starship Von Braun and something's gone very, very wrong.
Very cool. Cool.
Yeah, in typical sci-fi horror fashion, the Von Braun was investigating a distress signal coming from the nearby planet of Tau Ceti, and whatever they found there is what's caused this outbreak that's killed off almost everyone on the ship. And just to make things even worse, the Von Braun's AI system, Xerxes, has gone rogue, causing all the robots and security turrets to be hostile towards humans.
Remember, a smooth operation is everybody's responsibility.
Yeah, it just basically means that almost everything that exists in this game world wants to see you dead. Your only assistance comes from a woman named Dr. Polito who assists you early on in the story, as you navigate through these various decks.
The entire sector is depressurizing and the low vacuum shield won't last long. Get through a secure airlock before you're sucked into space.
Before you eventually then figure out what's really going on, and the reasons for the return of the first game's iconic villain, Shodan. Because yeah, like remember how in the first game, how Shodan used a few sections of the Citadel station as her own personal petri dish? Well, the Many are the result of those experiments, who have now become fully sentient and are seeking to break off from their creator. which is a pretty cool juxtaposition. I mean, you got Shodan on the one side being this mechanical, machine-like AI, with a serious god complex who views all organic matter as weak insects, and wants nothing else than just to have unchallenged order.
You are a remarkable example of a pathetic species.
Whereas the many symbolize the exact opposite. It's like this biological hive mind that just want to assimilate with every other living creature, like a giant pokeball full of DNA. What's also super interesting is when you just compare all the similarities it has to its spiritual successor Bioshock, a game which I'd argue that more people have played than they have System Shock 2. For instance, both of these start off with your character suffering from memory loss and then waking up in this abandoned, ahead of its time's environment, after some horrible event has left most of the inhabitants killed, with the first weapon in both instances being a wrench. The first main area is a medical wing before you then make your way to a hydroponic section where you need to remove a dangerous growth poisoning the air supply. There's even a section later on in a sort of entertainment hub. In Bioshock it's Fort Frolic, and then in System Shock 2 it's the Von Braun's recreation deck.
Welcome to Fort Frolic.
Perfection.
And both games have this similar mechanic of being able to see these ghostly visions of events that have happened in the past, or as Dr. Polito calls them, residual psychic emanations.
Don't let it distract you from the job at hand.
Also, much like the original System Shock, weapons all have alternate ammo types which work for better or worse against different enemies. Anti-armor rounds work best against cyborgs and robots, whereas anti-personnel bullets or incendiary rounds work best against organic targets. They even both share that massive plot twist about halfway or so into the game, which completely changes your goals around, really giving the last half of the campaign a bit of a second wind.
You perform well for an insect.
But then it also shares a few visual similarities with Thief. I mean, for starters, both of these original games ran on the Dark Engine, and much like those earlier titles, has a very similar aesthetic, with coloured lighting and shadows that still look really impressive, even I think by today's standards. The AI was also similar in the way that they not only reacted to visual elements, as in, seeing the player specifically, but also the noise you made. And if you ran around too much, well, they'd be likely to hear you and come and investigate. And if that's not enough, the sound effect for one of your psi abilities, the Pyroblast, is the same one used in the Thief games for the Fire Arrow.
Close enough.
You got Eric Brocious returning from Looking Glass Studios to do all the sound work, creating yet again another super haunting and eerie soundscape. With his wife Terry Brocious returning to voice Shodan.
Once I am
Master of this ship, I can open many doors for you.
All of which came together to make the whole experience really frightening. Outside of those moments when you were getting thumping techno music blared into your ears. And though it might seem kind of funny saying this by today's standards, back in the day, System Shock 2 was absolutely a horror game. I mean, I still remember running away from one of the hybrid enemies for the first time after getting seen, hauling ass for like 30 seconds to get away from this thing, only to turn around and see that it was still right there coming after me. And compare that to other games at the time, like Doom or Quake, right? Where if something was coming after you, you could usually just run out of the room and leave that thing eating your dust. In System Shock 2 though, enemies can and would pursue you relentlessly, which really made the whole thing a lot more horrifying, especially in tandem with the kind of sounds they'd make, like these inhuman moans, which really made them sound like they were in this constant state of torment. Oh yeah, not to mention, this game featured formerly human enemies with lines of dialogue where they showed that they were still somewhat self-aware, which even beat Half-Life 2's headcrab zombies to the punch by like half a decade. Now, the overall goal here has you playing as this nameless soldier who's trying to put a stop to all the madness, and you can do this any way you want, well, at least with there being 3 main ways to begin with. As the first real decision you got to make here is whether or not you're playing as a member of the Office of Secret Actions, or OSA, the Navy, or the Marines, with the Navy and the Marines being the same on a basic level in that they both focus primarily on guns. with most of the weapons being kinda standard in the form of a pistol, shotgun, assault rifle, and grenade launcher. Then you got the energy-based weapons like the laser rapier, the laser pistol, the EMP rifle, and then those exotic weapons like the crystal shard and the viral proliferator. All of which you'll need the necessary skills to use in the first place, because almost every single action or skill in this game has a stat requirement, from things like strength, endurance, and agility through to hacking, research, and maintaining your weapons, with the player frequently spending cyber modules on leveling all of these up.
Well done. I'm uploading some cybernetic modules.
With all of those bigger and tougher weapons requiring the most investment, a lot of which is arguably not even really necessary. The main difference between the Marines and the Navy, though, is that the Navy can also specialise in hacking, making that class really handy for shutting down security systems or getting into locked rooms or chests.
Security system offline.
Whereas the OSA is almost exclusively the hacker class, focusing primarily on melee weapons along with using a psi amplifier to boost your cybernetic abilities. On a basic level, this psi amplifier can fire out offensive projectiles like a cryo or pyroblast, but what I think most people are usually going to use it for is buffing up things like your strength and agility, along with using a protective shield or even later in the game becoming completely invisible, at which point it really is just GG. All of which again requires a pretty damn dedicated investment of cyber modules, to the point that you really do lock yourself out of playing the game any other way. And while it's not like any of these classes really force you into a specific playstyle, considering you can still drop points into anything you want, they definitely do set the foundations for how you're going to play the game on the whole. Usually I just find myself going with the Navy, only because that combination of being able to use all of the standard guns, also combined with hacking most security systems or locked chests, is just super useful. But I think regardless of what you go with, System Shock 2's core gameplay loop very quickly becomes addictive, and that constant reward of getting that small chunk of cyber modules to spend on the next set of upgrades, it really means that things truly never do get boring.
Well done. I'm uploading some more modules.
Good. It's also the kind of game where you really need to pay attention to the environment and listen to all the audio logs you come across, because a lot of the time, crucial door codes and information are hidden inside these things. And if you just kind of flub over them, well, you're gonna end up going in circles real quick. I mean, it's nowhere near as confusing or complex as that original game, but it is still the kind of thing that can have you turned around if you're just kind of half paying attention to what's going on. Having said that though, even if you are giving this thing your undivided attention, System Shock 2 can be kind of daunting initially. For starters, you're dealing with this whole pseudo point and click interface that really looks like something from the Windows 95 era, which it is. Early on, the layout in the environments can seem kinda confusing, and while you're trying to get your bearings, you're being detected by security cameras and you've got monkeys shooting cryo balls at you. Your weapons are going to break, you're going to struggle hacking into chests or security terminals, and even then, once you manage to get out of that initial starting area, you then find yourself in a literal maze that's completely irradiated, likely melting you to death before you even find the way out.
Radiation hazard.
I also reckon that whole mechanic of the different chemicals to research all the important items can also be really confusing as well, especially for a first-time playthrough.
Don't try to carry around all the chemicals at once. It's impractical and unnecessary.
And even after having beat this thing more times than I can count, I still can't remember which of these chemicals I actually need to bring with me. And I end up stockpiling enough jars of all of this crap to pretty much become my own futuristic version of Walter White.
You got me.
The thing is though, that if you endure and you keep playing, well then after a while you're gonna start to figure out how all of these systems work, no pun intended. And before you know it, everything is clicked. And then you go from being intimidated by the game world to fully interacting with it to the best of your abilities. And by the time you finally finish that story, all you're going to want to do is just go right back in there and play the whole thing over again.
You're goddamn right.
And that's really the beauty of System Shock 2 and the reason why people are still lovingly replaying it almost 30 years later. And even now, I still keep finding things I didn't even know existed. Whether it be like a little stockpile of items hidden away in some nook or cranny, or an audio log I'd never heard before. And the fact that a 25-plus-year-old game has so many things still going on is really a testament to how much Irrational Games and Looking Glass Studios were cooking back then. I mean, I played AAA games in the last couple of years that I only remember playing when someone reminds me about it.
Good work.
Having said all of that though, like, it's definitely not a perfect game, and there are still a few things going on about it that chafe my willy. The shooting, for instance, which plays a big part in the overall experience, can feel kinda lackluster at times, especially given the piss-weak hit feedback you often get from shooting enemies. The last couple of areas in the game also really are kinda terrible and feel very rushed, which apparently they were. I mean, without going into too much detail, there's a sequence there near the end where you need to find like a dozen or so eggs hidden around a dimly lit ship, and destroy all of them before you can progress. But if you miss a single one of these, which is probably going to happen on a first time playthrough, then it can be really annoying having to go back over everything with a magnifying glass trying to find them.
You've destroyed all the eggs.
And then the final area after this, which is at least visually interesting, is an absolute fucking chore to navigate. And I'd kind of equate this to those Zen levels in the original Half-Life, where you're moving about all of these alien environments which are so different to everything else that it's almost kind of like you've started playing a completely different game. Overall, it's not like an entirely game-ruining experience, but it is a bit of a shame that such a stellar campaign is bookended by these weaker moments. But apart from that, like, I can't really think of anything else that's worth bitching about.
Good.
And even decades later, the memory of System Shock 2 still lingers, which makes it also kind of awesome to think that a whole new generation of gamers are going to get that same experience, which I guess is as good a time as any to segue into the remaster itself.
Steady yourself, soldier.
So on a basic level, this is more or less a complete overhaul when it comes to all of the visual elements, with every single texture and model being updated, along with other aspects like the lighting also having improvements as well. You can see this to greatest effect when you're looking at things close up now, with things like security terminals and keypads, through to all those digital paintings and pin-up posted plastered on walls throughout the ship. In fact, you can even go up to all of those random terminals and literally read what's on the screen now, instead of it just looking like a blurry mess meant to replicate actual text. And it also does seem like basic improvements have been added in there as well, like extra signs on the floor, for instance, to help steer you in the right direction. Again, like nothing major or completely groundbreaking, just subtle changes to help that overall flow. In regards to all the various enemies, well, these are all improved upon as well, having a lot more detail, but still retaining the look and feel of the original, making sure they're all really horrific to look at. You know, just being given a few tweaks here and there so they don't look quite as dated, like with the midwives, for instance, how you can now see the metallic shine on their legs, which is something you just know is someone's fetish. But the absolute biggest change though is in regards to how the weapons look and animate. For instance, now with the pistol, there's an actual reload animation, instead of the weapon just lowering off the screen like it's GoldenEye 007. When the weapon is pulled out, there's a new animation as well where the slide is pulled back and you'll even see a bullet in the chamber. And then when you change ammo types, you can even see the player loading in the specific magazine into the weapon directly. With the shotgun, we can also see they've actually added in the player's hand now, holding the shotgun in a more traditional way. And when you fire, the forend is pulled back to load in the next shell. Same thing with the assault rifle, where we can again see the player's hand holding the weapon, instead of it looking like your character's got the grip strength of a 15-year-old who just discovered Sasha Grey for the first time. And again, when reloading the magazine or swapping out ammo types, we can see these magazines being put in manually. In regards to some of the other weapons and items, well, these are a bit more subtle. Like for instance, when you're now running around holding the psi amplifier, you'll notice that that little wire connected to your forearm actually jiggles back and forth. Yeah, kinda like your mum's cans. And I like too how when you pick up a wrench, you can see that it's already got a bit of blood on it, like someone's already put that thing to work. I've also picked up on a few other additions here and there, like during the training prologue for instance, how just after you've chosen your career path, you can see the ship that dropped you off leaving the hangar. And speaking of ships, later on in the game, when you get to that bit where you see the escape pod leaving, the visual effects here have been improved upon as well.
I like it a lot.
The areas of the ship that are flooded also have these water refraction effects added in, which looks awesome. Along with there being outright new rooms and areas added in. Like when you make it to the bridge, for instance, you can now go into Captain Diego's office, which, as far as I can recall, was never there in that original game. But hands down though, the coolest thing here is the way the Shodan reveal now looks, with her avatar actually having depth and even basic lip syncing. As opposed to it just being this flat 2D JPEG that talked to you for 15 minutes. Even at the start of the reveal, you can see how she tilts her head up as she looks at the player, which, yeah, makes an already creepy scene even creepier.
It is my will that gave you your cybernetic implants.
And then on top of all of this stuff, all of the pre-rendered cinematics have also been completely redone to make sure everything looks consistent, with the modelling for everything throughout all of these maintaining that same standard. Yes, even through to that iconic ending.
Nah.
I do feel like that recent remaster for The Elder Scrolls Oblivion might be giving people high expectations of what a remaster is supposed to look like, you know, considering that thing more or less had the appearance of a current gen title.
I think you might actually be telling the truth.
And it is worth noting that System Shock 2 doesn't do that. It's instead done that thing where it looks like what your brain remembered the original game looked like, if that makes sense.
Move it, Tommy! The escape pod is this way!
Night Dive have really shown with their other remasters for things like Doom and Quake, not to mention The Thing, that they truly have a knack for striking the right balance between updating something visually, but then also keeping the feel of the original. And yeah, I absolutely reckon they've achieved that here yet again with the System Shock 2 remaster, even if, like I said, half of that work was already done for them by the community to begin with. As for the gameplay additions, well, admittedly, there's a lot less of these. And in fact, I think really the only major change is that whenever you have to use an item on the environment or something, you no longer have to open your inventory and drag that item onto the object itself. You can just interact with it and the game does the rest. Which is really handy during that area where you've got to remove all the various growths out of hydroponics, limiting the amount of time you have to spend mucking about with all those harmful toxins, and just removing needless time otherwise wasted in your inventory. Even though in reality, oops, there goes gravity, most of this has probably just been done to accommodate people playing on the consoles or those who want to use a controller. It also does seem like certain areas have had more cyber module terminals added in to prevent backtracking, and in fact the last upgrade station you get in the game has been moved to the beginning of the Rickenbacker, as opposed to the end of it where it was in the original. Probably the biggest update I found though is how they fixed that whole replicator sequence. Now, for people who might not remember, there was a bit in the original game where you had to hack a vending machine to get a device out of it called a replicator, all to then destroy a shuttle in one of the nearby hangars. The only problem was, if you hacked this vending machine too early before getting some crucial dialogue from Shodan, well, you could essentially softlock yourself and make the game unbeatable. However, now in the remaster, even if you hacked the machine prior, you're still going to be able to go back in there and hack it again after Shodan's message, removing this kind of iconic glitch. And yeah, like I know that a lot of the stuff I've just mentioned was already available with the community patch, but to have this all included now from the get-go without having to download or install anything extra is a huge bonus. The other huge addition this remaster adds in is also something a lot of people have been pining for, and I'd wager the thing that most returning fans care about the most, which is the co-op mode.
Oh, what the hell was that? It's a fucking monkey!
And again, like I don't know how much you guys know about all of this, but basically the game was originally supposed to come with a 4-player co-op mode on launch, which it eventually did like a month or so later. However, it was also notoriously buggy and tricky to get working, with it being common for players to unintentionally break their runs entirely, along with it just not being balanced around multiple people. And despite the potential that it had, it's always been this weird anomaly that most people seem to steer clear of. Well, thankfully, all of that stuff is now back, and it's as easy as giving someone your game code and they can just hop right in.
You got ya.
Also working pretty smoothly for the most part, you know, aside from a few weird glitches here and there.
Yeah, so on mine, on yours rather, am I just sort of like running in place?
Yeah. which I think has more to do with your connection to the other players more so than it does the game itself. You still do all need to kind of be on the same page when you're playing this mode though, because there are a few conditions which make it kind of tricky. I mean, for starters, while cyber modules are individual for every player, almost every single other resource in the game isn't. Which means that nanites, weapons, ammo, and other items are singular, and you really need to communicate with your buddies on who should be picking up what. If everyone's also running the same class, weapons, and loadout, well, then yeah, that's also going to make it kind of challenging when there's less items overall. Much better. Having said that though, it's also incredibly forgiving, considering you don't even need to activate those respawn points, because whenever you're killed, you're just going to respawn at the beginning of the current area anyway. So yeah, like it's obviously not the way the game's meant to be played, and definitely not how you should experience it for your first time. But as an optional side mode after you've beaten the campaign and want to Dutch ride it through the whole thing with a mate, well, yeah man, there's a lot of value to be had here.
Wow, 2 shots, that's mad.
Plus the benefit of being able to save your progress so you can resume the campaign at any time with everything carried over is pretty awesome. All up, I'd say the remaster is pretty damn solid and really does all that it ever needed to do. It is definitely a bit weird though that it took them this long to get the whole thing finished, considering what they've achieved in less time with some of their other projects. And I'm not going to act like this whole thing is a flawless experience either, considering that there's a fair few glitches here and there that I encountered along the way. But overall, this is absolutely a sum of its parts kind of package. And for those people that it seems like it's actually aimed at, you know, that being first time players or people on the consoles, this is definitely going to tick the boxes that matter the most. And I mean, who knows, like there might even be a bunch of BTS stuff in that vault menu as well that even the most hardcore System Shock 2 fans haven't seen yet. I think what's most important is that both the good and the bad elements of the original System Shock 2 are still retained in Night Dive's remaster. And despite how long it's taken them, they've really achieved what they set out to do. That being, yet again, bringing a decades-old game to modern platforms, and making it easily playable. I mean, it's not going to reinvent the wheel or make any drastic changes to that overall formula, but then again, it never really needed to. So if you've been wondering for years whether or not that System Shock 2 game that all the old people on Twitter and YouTube keep talking about is actually worth playing, well, guess what? Now's your chance to find out. And if nothing else, either way, it's a damn sight better than Mind's Eye.
Oh, what the hell was that? It's a fucking monkey!